Okay, thanks everyone. Need to learn how far I need to stay from the mic. Thanks Preston and everybody for organizing this, by the way. This is the first in-person conference for me in almost 2 years. I'm a little nervous about it, but I'm loving it. So thanks so much, guys. And hello everyone online. I think we are sharing my handout, but there's a copy in the chat. If you wanna download it, it's in the chat. Okay. Now, so I think I'm gonna talk about things that are related to the last 2 talks. Okay, so hopefully there will be some connections that will become apparent as we go along. At the handout is circulating in the room. Okay, so I take rational agents to be agents who are able to form beliefs in response to reasons. Now, some philosophers, like for example, Hilary Kornblit here, Fred Hradec, Hans Klock, people who sympathize with normative externalism, advocate what we might call an unreflective characterization of responsiveness to reasons, according to which, roughly, as you can see at the beginning of the handout, beliefs whose formation is sensitive to facts about one's environment and facts about one's psychology may count as rational. Now, this is a notion, the notion of rationality that emerges from this is typically ascribed to some non-linguistic agents, like non-human animals, for example. Other philosophers, like, for example, Maria Alvarez, Christine Korsgaard, Davidson, Matthew Boyle, and many others, advocate a more demanding characterization of responsiveness to reasons, one that we might call reflective, according to which, roughly, only the beliefs of subjects who are able to identify their reasons and critically assess them may count as rational. Now, this is a notion of the notion of rationality that emerges from this is typically taken to be the exclusive prerogative of adult humans. Now, while the unreflective characterization gives us the means to have a theory of rationality, or some would say perhaps theory of intelligence, okay, that can explain the behavior of some non-linguistic agents like non-human animals, the apparent hiatus that seems to separate it from the reflective counterpart appears to suggest that whatever notion of rationality applies to non-human animals differs in kind from the one that applies to us. Okay, and that in turn will suggest that claims of human uniqueness with respect to rationality, as opposed to, say, claims of higher human proficiency in rational thought, would be vindicated. Now, in this presentation, I am interested into the relationship between these 2 characterizations of responsiveness to reasons, okay? And I want to suggest that the apparent hiatus that seems to be there may actually be filled in a way that suggests continuity. If so, claims of human uniqueness with respect to rationality would come under some pressure, or so I think. So I will begin by outlining briefly what I take to be a paradigmatic case of responsiveness to reasons in which language does play a crucial role, okay? But building on that, I will try to extrapolate its core feature and develop what I call epistemic higher order thinking, which then, by focusing on epistemic defeaters, the case of the process of epistemic defeater, I will show, or I will argue that it involves, it leads to a notion of reflective responsiveness to reasons that needn't involve linguistic expressions. So let me begin, moving on section 2 of the handout, by asking the general question of what does it take to respond to reasons reflectively? It is sometimes said that to respond to reasons reflectively, or to be rational in general, depending on who you talk to, one needs to be able to look at reasons as reasons, okay? One needs to be able to understand why one believes as one does, okay? And one needs to critically assess one's reasons and individuate, discriminate between the good and the bad putative reasons, at least. Now, what does it take to do that? To look at reasons as reasons in this way? Well, we might begin by noticing two things that would better not be required for that, okay? The first one is consciously entertaining a thought like reasons R support belief in P, okay? So if every time someone, if one could respond to reasons reflectively only if one were to entertain a thought like this, then we would have the result that very few of our beliefs would have a chance of being rational in the full sense. And we would risk launching an infinite regress as well. Let me give you a quick example to illustrate the point. So someone who were to come to believe that Hradec Králové is in Europe, upon inferring it from Hradec Králové is in Czech Republic and Czech Republic is in Europe, would be perfectly rational in doing so, without having to add the further thought, oh, believing that Hradec Králové is in Czech Republic and that Czech Republic is in Europe are good reasons for believing that Hradec Králové is in Europe. There's no need for that, okay? We would never end if we had to add that further thought. We could go the other level up again. And anyway, we don't do that in our way, in our belief formation activity, okay? And presumably we still want to say that many of our beliefs, at least, are rational. Another thing that would better not be required by looking at reasons as reasons is having a full command of concepts such as reasons for or evidence for. And this is because these concepts are heavily theoretical ones, okay? The experts disagree on the nature and the extent of these concepts. So very few people, if any, have a full command of this concept. So if we want to allow that ordinary people are able to respond to reasons reflectively, and I take it that we want to allow that, we better not require a full command, full grasp of these notions, okay? So what do we want, what can we legitimately require for looking at reasons as reasons? Well, we need perhaps, or probably, a pre-theoretical grasp of the notion of reason or the reasons for relation, okay? That much that is needed for one to individuate one's reasons and critically assess them, okay? And this is something that at least cognitively developed adults normally do when they address a request for reasons, when they answer a why question, okay? If you ask me, oh, why do you believe that Jan Cottiera was born in Brno? I will reply, well, I read that in the encyclopedia. And in giving you that reply, I will show you that, A, I'm able to identify my reasons for belief, okay? Checking the encyclopedia, read the information there. And two, that I appreciate their normative strength. I take those reasons to justify my belief. I stand by my belief. Checking the encyclopedia is a good way of finding out about birthplaces of architects. Now, when we focus on this case, we might be tempted to think that the ability to answer a why question is necessary for reflective responsiveness to reasons, okay? And if we do so, of course, we need language. So again, we have that difference in kind between the two characterizations of rationality there. And claims of human uniqueness with respect to rationality would be vindicated. But I think that if we take a closer look to this notion of looking at reasons as reasons, we don't have to go that way, because there is a minimal notion of reflective responsiveness to reasons that is available. And I'm now trying to outline that. Moving on to section 3 in the handout. So I want to begin by noticing that in virtue of the evaluative perspective that it involves, okay, looking at reasons as reasons is a form of higher order thinking. And I think this is where I come in the vicinity of something that was said in the previous two talks with respect to the general framework of meta talk that is a bit more minimal. I'll try to explain this now. So looking at reasons as an higher order dimension built into it, because when one identifies one's reasons and assesses them, one is in effect looking at what one does as an ordinary mere epistemic agent, in effect. Okay. Now, again, if we focus on the previous case, a case where we have a situation where there is a question, why do you believe that P? And the answer is, I believe that P because of Q. If we focus on this case, we might think that the relevant notion of higher order thinking is one that involves having thoughts about other thoughts. Okay, the thought, I believe that P because of Q is a thought that includes other thoughts. Okay, but again, I don't think we need to go that way. I think we have a more minimal notion of higher order thinking that doesn't require having thoughts about other thoughts. And this is what I call epistemic higher order thinking, which now I'll try to explain by introducing the notion of epistemic concepts. I take epistemic concepts to be those concepts which represent features of one's activity that are aimed at achieving and maintaining an accurate and coherent representation of the world. When I say they are aimed at, I don't mean to suggest that the agent is representing the relevant aim, by the way. Okay. Now, epistemic concepts, examples would be like knowledge, justification, truth, evidence, reliability, counter-evidence, defeaters, and so on. Epistemic concepts are the tools of the epistemologist. They are used by the epistemologist when the epistemologist describes how agents go about and ought to go about forming their beliefs, okay? But they are also within the reach and commonly used by ordinary agents in a number of circumstances, okay? In knowledge attributions, for example, or when somebody says, oh, that guy is a liar, well, that's using the epistemic concept of reliability. The epistemologist would say, perhaps, that person is not a reliable source of evidence. But the concept, in effect, is the same. It's an epistemic concept. It's a concept that describes some features that are relevant, that are central to the activity of going about achieving an accurate and coherent representation of the world. Now, with the notion of epistemic concepts on board, we can distinguish between first order and higher order epistemic thinking in the following way. Okay. Epistemic higher order thinking is let's say, the formation of leads to the formation of a doxastic attitude through the processing of some epistemic concept. Epistemic first order thinking leads to the formation of a doxastic attitude without the processing of an epistemic concept. Let me give you a quick example. Quick example of a first order epistemic thinking would be, for example, the inference we mentioned earlier on. Okay, Hradec Králové is in Czech Republic is in Europe, Hradec Králové is in Europe. Or basic perceptual beliefs. It's a sunny day today. Okay, that's all first order stuff. Attitudes are formed without the processing of any epistemic concepts. Examples of epistemic higher order thinking would be cases where one revises one's attitude in the light of information suggesting that one, for example, might have made a mistake in reasoning, or that one source is not reliable. Okay, one first believes that P and then suspends on P, for example, because of this consideration that one might have made a mistake. That's an example of epistemic higher order thinking. Okay, it's the formation of a doxastic attitude which involves the processing of an epistemic concept, but it does not involve a thought about another thought. Now, I propose, at least as a working hypothesis, to equate the notion of epistemic higher order thinking with the notion of reflective responsiveness to reasons, and that of first order epistemic thinking with that of unreflective responsiveness to reasons. Okay, and if we do that, now we can investigate the relationship between the two by asking the question, how can agents acquire epistemic concepts? How can epistemic concepts be acquired so that one can move from the dimension of unreflective responsiveness to reasons to that of reflective responsiveness to reasons, or epistemic higher order thinking? And to answer that question, moving on to section 4 in the handout, to answer that question, I'm going to focus on the case of epistemic defeaters, in the acquisition of epistemic defeaters or counter-evidence. I think this is a sound move for two reasons. One is that processing epistemic defeaters is central to rational belief revision and responsiveness to reasons, or at least epistemic reasons. You cannot really talk about rational belief revision without talking about responding to counter-evidence. And two, when it comes to the reflective dimension of epistemic higher order thinking, many of the cases that have made the notion salient in recent epistemological literature, such as that on peer disagreement, for example, concern cases of defeat, or what is sometimes called in the literature higher order defeat. Okay, so let's focus on defeaters. Now, defeaters comes in many shapes and sizes, as we have just been reminded in the previous Q&A session. The most well-known distinction in the realm of defeater is the one between underminers and overriders, or if you prefer, rebutters and undercutters. It's just different names for the same thing. Overriders, or rebutters, if you like, give one a reason to replace a belief in P that one has with belief in not P. You believe in P, and then you acquire a reason to believe not P. That's what an overrider does, okay? Undermining defeaters, they don't do that. They just give one a reason to give up a belief in P without thereby suggesting that one should replace belief in P with belief in not P, okay? This is a simplification, of course. There are all sorts of mixed and complicated cases, but the most basic cases work like this, and it's helpful to keep things simple at this stage. Now, I think it's clear that, or I find it clear that the simple cases of ordinary overriding defeaters can be processed entirely at the first order without the processing of any epistemic concept. So, for example, if I believe, say, on the basis of apparent memory, the keys are on the kitchen table, okay, and then I go and check, and I see that there are no keys on the kitchen table, then I automatically revise my belief in P, the keys are on the kitchen table, with belief in not P, the keys are not in the kitchen table, on the kitchen table. And that's all first order stuff, okay? No processing of an epistemic concept. Undermining defeaters are a bit more complicated. I think it's an open question whether all of them involve epistemic concepts. I have sympathies for the view, but we don't have to engage with that now, because for our purposes, it's sufficient to focus on those undermining defeaters which clearly do involve the processing of epistemic concepts, or the acquisition of which clearly does involve the process of epistemic concepts, for the simple reason that they have it in their content. Okay, and I'm alluding at undermining defeaters such as the source of evidence is unreliable, or the evidence is misleading. Sorry for I'm struggling with the distance with the mic. Now, let's focus on these cases. The source of evidence is misleading, or the evidence is misleading, or the source is unreliable. And let's ask the question, how can these defeaters be acquired? How are they acquired? To investigate our question on the relationship between first order and higher order epistemic thinking, of course. Now, moving on to section 5 in the handout. In many cases, subjects acquire undermining defeaters like the source is unreliable from a third party. So, for example, if you're in a new city and you're looking for the post office, let's say, and you ask a random stranger where the post office is, and you're told, yeah, just go down the road to the right, and you start walking in that direction, but you see a traffic warden that comes up to you and calls you up. He has observed the scene, the traffic warden, and tells you, look, that guy is a pathological liar, so whatever he told you, better not believe that. Okay. Well, in that situation, you have acquired an undermining defeater to the effect that the source is unreliable from a third party. Okay, this is very common, I think. But presumably, at least in some cases, that third party would have acquired the undermining defeater first person. So we might suppose, for example, the traffic warden would have seen the random local misleading people many times before. Or to change the example, perhaps to make it a bit clearer, suppose you join a new office and you get to know your new colleagues, okay? And over the course of time, over the days and weeks perhaps, you notice that there is one person who says things that then don't turn out to be true, okay? He says, I'll be at the meeting, I'll send you that document, I'll come for lunch. And then he wasn't at the meeting, he didn't send you the document, he didn't come for lunch, and so on. And after a while, we generalize on the basis of the acquisition of these several overriders. So you had formed the beliefs that P, and then the evidence revealed that, oh, actually, no, P is the case. Okay, the process of these overriders that affect beliefs formed following the evidence coming always from the same source, then you generalize to, oh, the source is unreliable. My colleague is not that trustworthy after all. When you do that, okay, you will then refuse or be much more hesitant to form beliefs in the future coming from that source, following the indication of what your colleague says, in this case. But what is more important for us is that when that happens, okay, when one generalizes to the source is unreliable from processing several overriding defeaters that affect beliefs form following indications coming always from the same source, one in effect forms a thought with an epistemic concept purely on the basis of thoughts which have no epistemic concepts in them. And that suggests that in this case, epistemic higher order thinking is grounded in first order epistemic thinking. So there is a continuity there. One can achieve the dimension of epistemic higher order thinking, the evaluative dimension of looking at one's reasons as reasons, purely by using the resources one already has as a non-reflective belief manager, we might say. That is the suggestion. I want to say a bit more about that. How long do I have? Five minutes? Do I have 5 minutes? Yeah, okay, good. I want to say a bit more about that. So, okay, good. Let's try to compare this case, okay, when you generalize from the acquisition of several overriders to the source is unreliable, to other generalizations, okay. Take the case, for example, where one observes many barking dogs, dog 1 bark, dog 2 bark, dog 3 bark, and so on, and then one generalizes to all dogs bark. Now, in this case, we have a generalization, okay, which does not involve epistemic higher order thinking, okay? There is no process of epistemic concept there, okay? So what is special about our generalization, the one that involves the ascent to the dimension of epistemic higher order thinking? Well, what is special is that one takes what we might call the epistemic look in this second case, okay? Whereas where one generalizes to all dogs bark, one is required only to look at the various the elements that compose the inductive base for what they literally represent, namely barking dogs. When it comes to the processing of the overriding defeaters that enable one to generalize to the sources unreliable, one looks at the various instances of the inductive base for as something more than what they literally represent. as instances of epistemic behavior that warrants a bad evaluation. Okay, I'm gonna say that is in effect what's going on. So why does one take the epistemic look in the case of the sources are reliable, but not in the case of all dogs bark? That's the question. And I want to suggest that one does that because one has the sensitivity to epistemic defeaters that comes with being an unreflective agent. Okay, any unreflective agent has the minimal aim or goal, and again, they needn't represent that aim or that goal. They just have it. Okay, of achieving, for how small it might be, or achieving an accurate and coherent representation of the world. Okay, and that involves giving up a false belief and replacing it with a true one whenever it's possible to do so. And that involves having sensitivity to simple overriding defeaters. Our first order simple overriding defeaters. Okay, but those overriding defeaters, when they are acquired, each of them carry with it the covert information that there was something wrong with the belief that has just been defeated, namely, it was false. Now, that's okay in many cases. In many cases, our source of justification and knowledge are typically fallible, so they might give us, a false belief now and then. It's fine. If that is the problem is already solved by the acquisition of the overriding defeat, which gives us, the true belief. Okay, but when the overriding defeaters, okay, which tell you the previous belief was false, in effect, they have that covert information. Okay, they don't tell you, they just have that. Okay, when they affect always, beliefs that are formed following the evidence coming from the same source, then they put the epistemic alert agent in the position to ask some questions about the reliability of the source, and thereby to ascend to the dimension of epistemic higher order thinking. So again, the point is that no major or high cognitive skills are required for do that. All that is required is the capacity to generalize and sensitivity to ordinary simple positive reasons and ordinary simple overriding defeats. Okay, that's all the unreflective stuff, plus the capacity to generalize. Okay, so it comes with being an agent who is engaged in the project of achieving and maintaining an accurate and coherent representation of the world, in effect. Now, of course, we can surely imagine agents who, for whatever reason, they remain stuck at the first order level. Okay, they're not able to make the relevant generalizations for whatever reason. Okay, and so they cannot recognize some sources as unreliable on the basis of being misled a number of times. What subjects can do that or not is an empirical question. The point here is that there is no reason to expect that only subjects who are able to answer why questions are able to do that. Okay, because if all that is required is the sensitivity to simple overriding defeaters and the capacity to generalize, that is something that can be achieved at a very, very simple level of abstraction in thought. Very young children can do that, in effect. Okay, if they're able, in principle at least, if they're able to recognize a source as unreliable and then stop following the indication coming from the source after a while. Okay, if they do that, they are in effect being guided by a thought like, my putative reasons might not be good now, and I hesitate to follow them. Okay. Now, of course, there are questions having to do with how to test that empirically. Sure, but the point here is just that there is no reason to expect that this is something that only subjects who are able to answer why questions can do. I think there was a bit more that I wanted to say in the handout, but I feel like I've been talking for quite a while already, so I'm just gonna conclude by saying that we should be open to the possibility of basic forms of reflective responsiveness to reasons in non-linguistic agents, at least to the extent that we are willing to ascribe to non-linguistic agents unreflective responsiveness to reasons. Perhaps you don't want to do that, but that's another debate, though. But if we are open to ascribing to them unreflective responsiveness to reasons, then I think we should be open to the possibility that they might be able to achieve reflective responsiveness to reasons, or basic forms of reflective responsiveness to reasons too, because I'm talking here about just some basic forms of that. I'm not talking about, again, having thoughts about other thoughts. Okay, thanks very much.
Okay, we can start with discussions. Yarda first, then Pietro.
So a point of clarification. The very first concept you introduce on your handout, the unreflective responsiveness to reasons, you speak about perceptions and so on. So when I look from the window and see that the sun is shining, and I say the sun is shining, I'm responsive to a reason, right? So what exactly is the reason? The shining sun, or what?
Well, I want to remain neutral about what exactly reasons are. That there is a debate on the nature of reasons, of course. You know, are they facts? Are they propositions? Are they mental state? I want to say as little as possible, though. Although I'm focusing on operative reasons. Okay, so there is that distinction between operative and normative reasons. So normative reasons are reasons that actually speak in favor of taking a doxastic attitude. Operative reasons are the reasons for which one, in fact, forms a doxastic attitude. So I'm focusing on those reasons, whatever they might be. They may be facts, they may be mental states or perceptions. You know, I want to remain neutral on that.
Okay, but if a machine reacts to the sun by something, by emitting something or whatever, the machine is not responsive to reason, right?
No, right, yeah.
So where's the difference between me saying the sun is shining and the machine?
Well, I would say, although I mean this is a reply that, of course, you know, invokes, brings into the picture large debate. I would say that you have a mind, and the machine, depending on what machine we're talking about, of course. But if you're talking about something like a thermometer, they don't have a mind, so they don't have what we might call properly perceptions, whereas you do have those because you have a mind. But of course, that's a big one.
Okay, Pietro.
Thanks for your talk, Giacomo. Yeah, you draw a very interesting conclusion about the distinction concerning reflective and unreflective kind of reasoning and a first order, higher order kinds of assessment that we can operate about this kind of reasonings. And you say that some kind of non-human, non-linguistic reasoning can be identified by ruling out reflective reasoning, which is typically human, for example. Well, I think you should restrict even more the field by considering the fact that we have also unreflective reasoning, which is linguistic, however, and this cannot be attributed to non-humans. So you can insert this kind of further restriction in order to identify the possibility of a genuine reasoning, which is a reflective and shared by non-human animals and non-linguistic agents, for example. So,
Yeah, sure. But I mean, I am more interested into finding the link between unreflective and reflective stuff. You know, I don't think it would be that surprising to find unreflective instances of reason. I mean, I'm saying it would be, yeah, I mean, I know there is a debate on whether, for example, animals reason or not, and that comes down to what do we mean by reason as well. By making very simple inferences, I mean, or responding, I'm using a very liberal notion of reasoning. Perhaps I should have clarified that, which is really the formation of a doxastic attitude. Okay, so even basic perceptual belief, which do not involve any transitions in thought from a doxastic attitude to another, would count as, at least for the purpose of this thing, as thinking, let's say, as thinking. It's no reason. Yeah, so thanks.
So we continue with Kirill. Go ahead.
Hello. Yeah, so going back to the example of the sun, Peirce says that we can use a sign as a reason. So if someone asks me why I'm wearing sunglasses, I can point at the sun. But that's a problem in terms of what the sign is doing. So in some ways, signs are broader than language, but like if a moth is using a light bulb as a sign, it's going round and round light bulb. What's different for Peirce is that reasons allow selection, and to make selection, I have to hold the sign as a sign. And it seems to me that in order to hold the sign as a sign, I need to hold it into certain relations of other signs. And once we do that, then that's already discourse rather than something pre-discursive.
Sorry, I'm not sure I follow it all because the sound was a bit distorted here. But you started by saying that you can address a why question without using language, right?
Just to explain again. So if I point at a sign, the sign can serve as a reason, but in order to be a sign that it can be a reason, it has to support selection, and to support selection, I have to hold it as a sign. So I can't just be moved by the sign. I have to hold it as a sign, and to hold it as a sign, it's already in discourse because it has to relate to other signs.
And is that a problem for me?
Well, because then I don't see how it's reasoning. So a moth responding to the sign of a light bulb is acting in response to what we might call reasons, but in the same way, as Sellers would say, it's pattern governed, not rule governed.
I mean, by reason, I mean, so the notion of reason I'm using is close to the notion of evidence. So whatever speaks in favor, or you take to speak in favor of the truth of a given proposition, that is a reason for this purpose. I don't know if that helps. Okay, maybe we're talking past each other. Drop me an email if you like, please. Cheers.
Okay, we continue with Ulf.
Thanks for the talk, very interesting. I have a question that harks back to, I think, something in the vicinity of what Marlene was talking about this morning. So there's all this literature on metacognition in all kinds of animals. And I'm wondering whether you would be willing to count that as reflective responsiveness to reasons, because it seems that there would be a way to construe that as being sensitive to the reliability to evidence, right? So if you're not willing to count that, then I would like to know why. And if you are willing to count that, then I would like to know why your account doesn't massively overgenerate. So,
sorry, did you say procedural metacognition?
Sorry, what's that?
Did you say procedural metacognition? Is the question whether procedural metacognition?
Well, the kind of experiments I have in mind, you know, when you train rats that to press a lever if they know where the pellet is, and if they don't know, they can opt out of that trial, and then they get more, can have more trials later on. They are perfectly capable of doing that kind of thing. So it seems that they have some kind of sense of how sure they feel about things, however you want to describe that. I don't know how to describe the minds of rats, but you know, what they do is they press the lever to opt out of these kinds of things. And then I'm wondering whether they fulfill your conditions or not.
Well, I mean, we would have to look at the specific case, but I'm not aware of any current studies, and I might just be missing something, of course, that does fulfill what I would be looking for. Okay, so the sensitivity of the because I mean, what I'm looking for is more than just the sensitivity to the unreliability of the source. It's the recognition that the source is unreliable, say, in a new context. Okay, so it's the ability to recognize the same source as unreliable when it's giving information in different scenarios, for example. Okay, and then we will have to look at how they react the very first time they're given, the subject is given misleading information coming from that source in a new scenario. And some of the studies in metacognition that you have mentioned show that subjects are aware of being uncertain, but I think that is a first order phenomenon, being aware of being uncertain. You know, it's just as a normally first order epistemic agent, okay, who's only engaged in unreflective, who can only engage in unreflective thinking. You are going about trying to answer questions, okay? Where is food? When you do that, just the fact that you are asking that question, if only figuratively, shows that you are aware that you don't know the answer. And many of those cases can be explained in this way. So awareness of one's uncertainty is a first order phenomenon, is indeed part and parcel of what it takes to be a minimal epistemic agent, even if it remains only at the unreflective level.
Okay, thank you.
I don't know if,
We'll have time for one question.
This is just a clarifying question about how strong the claim is. The thought that acquiring and undermining defeater by generalizing over several overriders involves reflective reasoning. That's necessarily reflective reasoning.
yeah, so yeah, it's precisely in making that generalization that one can achieve the very first step towards reflective responsiveness to reasons. That is the claim, basically. Because in making that generalization, one is taking an evaluative perspective on the reasons one has received so far.
And by acquiring the undermining defeater, that means having the belief.
Yeah, the source is unreliable. Yeah, forming that belief.
And being able to say that. I was just wanting to make sure that the case of like the child who gets lied to by someone a bunch of times and then stops trusting that person, right? So it seems like they've been responsive to an under.
Well, I mean, so if we're talking about how to empirically test that, okay. So if we're talking about the empirical test, how do we do that? How can we test that empirically? Then I don't think it's enough to observe someone who stops following the indication of a source after that source has proven to be unreliable a few times, okay? Because that is something that can be done out of simple tiredness. You know, you just get fed up of receiving, you know, of not finding what you want when you follow that information, for example. So if we want to test whether they have that thought, the source is unreliable, we need to do more than that. We need to observe that the child or the animal is able to recognize the source as unreliable in different circumstances. Okay, so that the explanation that say they were just, you know, they just got fed up with, they just got frustrated with not achieving what they wanted following the information they received is not available anymore. So that we can see that they, in effect, categorize that source as unreliable in different contexts. And especially important, I think, is observing what they do the very first time they are offered a piece of information coming from the source that was previously unreliable. How do they react the first time in the new context? Okay, if they are very hesitant the first time, then that would be a sign that perhaps they have grasped that the source is unreliable. If instead it takes them a long time to learn again that the source was unreliable, then perhaps they hadn't done that, they have to do it again. But I mean, issues having to do with empirical testings, yeah, there are many out there, of course.
Thank you.
Out of time, so thank the speaker.
Thank you.
10 minutes break.